Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh to everyone.
Assalamualaikum.
So we will start our session shortly. Probably sharp at 3 we are going to start the session. Okay, so Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wabarakatuh. Good afternoon and welcome to everyone. I think we can start now, Dr. Kadir.
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so welcome to everyone to this session. My name is Azila Anis. I am the head of department for postgraduate and professional studies, Faculty of Business and Management, Shah Alam. So I am the moderator for this session, which is evaluating thesis for PhD of non-science and technology areas, which will be delivered by Associate Professor Dr. Abdul Kadir Othman from the Faculty of Business and Management, Punca Alam. So to make this session more barakah, let us start our session with Umul Kitab Al-Fatihah. Amin amin ya rabbal alamin. Okay, first of all, I would like to say thank you for IPSis for organize this event, for organize this webinar series. I think it is very fruitful to all of us. So before we start our session, before Professor Madya Dr. Kadir shared his views and expertise on the title that has been given to him, so let me share some few important information from IPSis on Masters and PhD program by research. So I will share the slide here. Boleh nampak tak slide?
Belum lagi.
Belum
Tak lihat.
lagi. Okay?
Alright.
Okay. So actually this is the the slide that been given to us by IPSis, which is Associate Professor Dr. Aman. So okay, the information that will be shared to us is this one. Yeah, this is the current statistic of masters and PhD students at UiTM. The yellow and the red bar is the number of masters and PhD students by research as according to the faculty. And the top one is the total number of students for masters and PhD program by research. It is intake per year from 2005 to 2020. So this is the number of masters and PhD students by faculty from 2005 to 2020. Faculty of Applied Sciences obtained the highest number for students for master's research program, while the Faculty of Business and Management is obtained the highest number of students for PhD research program. This is the timeline for research graduate on time or GOT that is only entitled for the full-time students. For the master student, the GOT is 24 months, and for the PhD program, it is 48 months, except for medicine, architecture, and dentistry, where the GOT for these faculties for master's program are 36 months and PhD is 60 months. Okay, this bar chart shows the number of masters and PhD students that still not defend their research proposal by faculty. The red color indicates that the numbers that do not exceed the due date, and the blue color has exceeded the due date. As what we can see from the table, the time that is required for the full-time to do their DRP is 6 months for master's program and 12 months for PhD. Whereas for the part-time student, the required time for them to do their DRP is 12 months for master's program and 80 months for PhD. For the Faculty of Business and Management, I think this is a serious issue. We have identified the student that we have categorized them as in the red zone, as in the yellow zone, and at the green zone. And some strategies have been planned and will be taken in order to reduce the number of the red one. Okay, the first chart on your left shows the number of students that have done their viva voce by faculty from January to July 2020, while the second chart on your right is the chart that shows the number of students that are still waiting for their viva voce. And I think the session that we will have with Associate Professor Dr. Kadir is in line with the second chart. This is the chart which shows the number of students that have done their viva voce and the result that they obtain, which is 2 or minor corrections by faculty. Whereas this is the chart that shows or indicate the number of students that have had their viva voce and the result is 3 or major correction, either no or with reviva by the faculty. And this is the figure that shows the number of graduates from master's and PhD program by research. As what we can see that the number is quite low in 2020 as compared to the previous year. And this is alarming layer. And for the IGOT, we noticed that the IGOT for the PhD program is higher which is 13% if we compare with the IGOT for the master's program, which is 5%. So, okay, this is the QR code, yeah, for you to provide some feedback and for the attendance for this session. Therefore, I think that is all from me. The slide that been presented just now would like to highlight on the importance of this webinar series to us. Therefore, without further ado, I would like to invite Associate Professor Dr. Abdul Kadir Othman to share his view and expertise on evaluating thesis for PhD of non-science and technology areas. Associate Professor Dr. Kadir, please welcome.
Alright, thank you, Dr. Azila.
Yes.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh and good afternoon. Okay, I saw so many familiar faces joining the session. Okay, yang mana semua hebat-hebat belaka all the professors and our ex-dean pun ada, Dr. Siti. Okay, the session today is about the evaluation of PhD thesis. There are a lot of issues actually. There are a lot of issues pertaining to the evaluation of thesis because of subjectivity of the evaluation. We can see that some evaluators, some assessors are very strict, some are very lenient, and some are very moderate in the middle. And there is no standard for evaluation. It is up to individual evaluators or assessors. So we want to look into the aspects or the criteria that have been used by most evaluators or assessors when they evaluate their PhD thesis. Okay, let me share the slide. Can you help me? Window, right?
Boleh Dr. Kadir?
Kalau boleh tolong saya, ada slide kan? Slide saya.
Oh.
Saya dah buka, jadi kejap.
Dia tak.
Sharing slide kan? Okay, let me just proceed with different types of degree. Kita ada, we have PhD, the highest at the highest level. Then we have master by BBA. After that, we have masters by research. All the three levels require different level of assessment, different level of evaluation. First, we can see that PhD is the most rigorous when we evaluate the thesis. And now I'm evaluating one thesis from IIUM. There are a lot of issues actually when we evaluate the process, but it is not the main objective of evaluating the thesis. The main objective is to improve the thesis. That is the main objective. We have to bear in mind that we are not looking for the mistakes, or we are not looking for the errors or the weaknesses of the student. We are actually helping the student. We want to have the student to improve the work. So when we evaluate the thesis, three most important things that should be looked into. The first one is, of course, we want to make sure that the thesis, different level of dissertation, whether it is PhD or dissertation or master by research, we want to make sure that the work meets the standards required by the university or the MQA. Okay. Then the second one is, of course, we want the candidates to achieve certain level, certain required level in terms of academic capabilities. And the last one is also important, which is we want to make sure that the students or the candidates have made some contribution to the body of knowledge. These are the three criteria that are important when we evaluate the PhD thesis. Okay, next one is regarding uh, the areas that we want to look into when we evaluate PhD thesis. Okay, the first one is, of course, the ability to identify and justify the gap. Of course, everybody knows that when we want to write the thesis, the first thing that we want to do is to identify the problem and also to identify the gap. After that, we need to justify the gap in research. We don't want to do something that has been done by other researchers. That's why we want to focus on the new area, or at least we can make some contribution to the body of knowledge. It is critical because we want to see whether the student can think further uh, to look into the area that is new or novel, and they can make some contribution to the respective field. And the second one is the ability of the student to defend the ideas. We can, when we do the research, when we conduct research pertaining to our PhD. Of course, we need to defend the title of the research, the topic of the PhD. Why do we focus on that topic? There must be some reason, some justification for the decision. Second one, of course, we want to know whether the students have chosen the right condition, the right underlying theory to justify the selection of variables.
Ya, sorry Dr. Kadir, nanti
Yeah,
tolong
sure.
beritahu ya untuk yang change slide. Staff saya akan change slide ya.
Sure, no problem. Thank you very much. Okay, sama tadi. Okay, ability to defend. Of course, we want to know whether the students are able to defend their ideas. That is the most important thing when we evaluate it. We ask a lot of questions to identify, to know whether they have the ability to defend their ideas. The third criteria, of course, we want to make sure that the students should be able to synthesize the information. When we review past research, when we go to doing some literature review, of course, we found a lot of information pertaining to our topic. And the most important thing when we do PhD, when our students do PhD, we want them to be able to synthesize the information. We don't want them to just reproduce or just copy and paste. A lot of students have done this. They just copy other information and paste the information and do some adjustment to the copied information. That is not the right way of doing literature review. They should be they have to read, understand, synthesize the information, and reproduce the idea according to the needs of the studies. Okay. Next one is ability to choose the right instrument. This is also very important in our research because if we use the wrong information, wrong instrument when we collect the data, of course, our data going to be not suitable or invalid for our study, and of course, the whole work, the whole thesis will be it cannot be used. It will be incorrect. It cannot be evaluated as the good thesis, the good PhD thesis. That's why choosing the right instrument is very important. The next one is ability to analyze data. This is also important, but some assessors and examiners, they tend to focus on the most current data analysis. for example, using PLS, using smart, using MOS and so on. But for me, the most important thing is the ability of the student to analyze the data and to reach the conclusion, and also the ability of the students to defend the choice in selecting the appropriate data analysis technique. Whether they want to use SPSS, MOS, Smart PLS, or other analytical tools, it is up to them. The most important thing is the ability of the student to justify their choice. All right. Next one is also important, which is the ability to apply. The findings of the study, whatever findings of the study, to solve the problem. Because when at the first stage of doing research, we have to identify the problem, the gap, and find suitable theory to support our model, find the data, collect the data, and do the analysis. After that, we should be able to apply the findings to solve the problem. And that's why the fifth chapter is also important to our study. Not only the first chapter or the third chapter, which is methodology section or the analysis part, but the fifth, the last chapter is also important. We want to see whether they have the ability, the students have the ability to apply the findings of the study to solve the real problem. And the last one is the philosophical level achieved by the student. That's why we ask a lot of questions to the student to test whether they have achieved certain level of philosophy. Uh, for example, in defending the choice of the model or the theory, uh, the use of analytical tools to analyze the data and so on. These are all uh, related to the philosophical level achieved by the students. All right, next slide, please. Okay, I would like to go further in detail to each of the criteria that we normally as examiners use to evaluate the thesis. If let's say you have something in mind that you want to ask for clarification, that you can interrupt me. It's okay, no problem. We can have a more lively interaction. Otherwise, I am the only one for talking to the computer. Okay. All right. Identifying or justifying the gap in research. Okay. Normally, we want to know whether the students are able to differentiate between the actual problem and the research problem. Some students fail to differentiate these two. Actual problem is the real problem faced by whether individual or company or employees and other subjects of the study. And research problem is something which has not been solved or completely solved by researchers, by previous researchers. So we need to make sure that our students, if let's say we are supervising the students, we have to make sure that they should be able to identify the problem, show the statistics uh, to indicate that the problem is critical, and they are also required to identify the gap in research, showing that there are limited studies pertaining to the topic of interest. Uh, in doing so, they have to provide some justification. They need to provide some supports, citations, current citation, to see or to show that there is a gap in research. When I read the thesis, I mentioned to you, I'm now in the process of evaluating a thesis. Okay, there is a gap. The students have shown that there is a gap in research, but he failed to show to demonstrate that uh, there is a gap. He, based on the discussion in the problem statement, we can see that there is a gap. but there's no support, there's no further discussion pertaining to the gap. So we can argue with the student, we can question the student whether the gap is actually there. That's why ability to identify, justify the gap is very important. All right. Next one, pertaining to justifying the gap, we need to, how can we prove that there is a problem that needs to be investigated? Okay. Next slide, please. The fifth slide. Slide number 5. Okay. These are the 3 questions that are important when we want to justify the gap in research. As I mentioned earlier, of course, students have to show that there is a real problem, provide the statistic to support the claim, and also to identify the gap and provide some citation and discussion on the existing studies pertaining to the gap. Okay, next one. The next slide. Marcelina, please. Next slide. Okay, I just move on. Okay, second ability, the second criteria, important criteria is the ability to defend. The student's ability to defend. Okay, the first thing that he or she must consider is that every decision must be justified. Every decision in the thesis, the process of doing the thesis must be justified in choosing the right theory, in choosing the instrument, the analysis, and so on. All things must be justified. If there is no justification, then we can question the student. All right, next one is every claim must be supported with the most recent evidence. Every claim that the students, PhD students made must be supported with the most recent evidence. And the evidence must come from good journal, journal article, good that we trust. Not simply from any publication. All right. Next one is don't give your own reason without any support. Don't give your own reason without any support. Okay, some students they just provide own justification without having to show that the justification is actually backed up by previous studies. That's why in our research we need to support all our claims, our decision by using strong evidence or support citation from previous research. All right. Okay. The third ability, the next one, please. Any questions so far? Okay, the third one is regarding the ability to synthesize information. Okay, when our students look into relevant articles, relevant journals articles, make sure that the information is relevant, recent, and of high quality and authority. That's why I mentioned that we need to look for authoritative journal because of the quality of the information provided in the journal. Otherwise, maybe what we use to support our decision, our claim is not good enough. All right. Okay. Next one.
Welcome, Doctor.
Yeah. No. Yeah.
Doctor, can I ask a question?
Okay. Sure. No problem.
Okay, you mentioned earlier that we have to look for information from quality sources. So I was wondering if you can list down certain sources that PhD students should avoid at all costs, which are weaker, which are stronger for us to refer to.
Okay. Some journals. We can see that predatory journal. Have you heard about predatory journal? Anything, as long as you are able to pay the fees, can be published in that journal. That's the problem. So when we use that citation, it is going to be a problem to us when we want to defend our work. That's why we need to look for good journal, Scopus, for example, Scopus Index Journal, ISI Journal, and those index journal can be used to support our work. Right? A lot of journals actually under Scopus or ISI or ERA and other good journals.
Can I know the status of referring to thesis, like past thesis as well as textbooks? Are
Thesis,
those considered
when you
with?
want
Yeah.
to use thesis,
Yeah.
thesis, when you refer to thesis, then of course it is thesis actually the word that has been verified by others, that have been checked by others. Of course, you can use or you can refer to those information in the thesis. There is no problem when you refer to thesis.
Okay.
All right. Okay. Next, after you have searched for the information, you need to read and summarize the information. In this case, I ask my student to use LR matrix to summarize whatever they have read. I always say to my student that when you read one article, when you move on to another article, uh, you are going to forget about the first article. That's why you need to write something, at least in the form of LR matrix, so you will remember whatever you have read before. All right? Okay. Uh, Normally, we jot down the gist of the study that we have read and also integrate the information. We use the information, we integrate the information, we synthesize the information and use in our LR part or to support our decision in the thesis. Don't copy directly, don't just describe. We need to provide some argument. We need to provide some justification. We should be able to defend our idea when we discuss something in our thesis, in our work. Some students, they just describe the relationship without having to argue anything. They describe the relationship, provide evidence, provide support. After that, they just summarize or conclude the relationship with the hypothesis. It is not enough because students should be. This is critical when we want to evaluate whether the student has the ability to go beyond normal ability just to describe something, lower level of cognitive. They have to have the higher level, higher level of thinking. All right, argument should be there. Argument is very important when students want to do good literature review section. All right, we move on. To the next ability of the students. When we evaluate the thesis, of course, we want to see whether the students are able to choose the right research instrument. Have you heard about GIGO? Garbage in, garbage out. When we have selected a wrong instrument, of course, we will get wrong information, wrong data, and data cannot be used in our study. The decision that we found, that we made, or the analysis that we made, using bad data, of course, cannot be used to solve the problem. It
Doctor,
is the heart of the, yeah.
just now you mentioned that ability to synthesize information is to argue, make an argument. Can you give example of the argument? What kind of argument?
Okay. When we want to support the relationship, for example, let's say we want to study on job performance, employees' job performance. We want to say that leadership is very important, and it will lead to increased job performance of employees job performance. So if let's say we are not able to argue in terms of the information that we found from previous research, previous articles, and we will just cite studies have found that leadership is very important to increase the performance level of employees. Then you explain about the study. It is just describing the previous studies. You don't argue anything. Should be able to say that the study is not good. The study have used incorrect method, wrong justification. So we should be able to provide our own judgment regarding the studies that we have referred to. That is one of the way of arguing with the information that we found in our search, in our literature search. Okay, Nur Azza, are you clear?
Okay, Dato', thank you.
Kita argue. We are not just going to describe the information that we found in other research articles and so on. We should be able to think beyond simple level of connectivity, as I mentioned earlier. We should be able to argue. We should be able to provide something, suggest something to improve. Okay. All right, we move on to the next level, the next ability to choose the right instrument. As I said earlier, it is the heart of the thesis. If let's say we use wrong instrument, we'll get bad data, and by having bad data, we cannot go further. Everything is not going to be that cannot be used to support our research. And because the data are bad, they cannot be used, and everything is going to be wasted. Wasted. Okay. When we want to look for the right instrument, always refer to established sources. Always refer to established sources. As I mentioned earlier, we have to look for the quality journals, quality articles from maybe Scopus Index articles and so on. From there, we can see that the instrument shown in those articles are good instruments, so we can use. I can see that some examiners or some students, some lecturers say that okay, we have to use certain rule in evaluating the instrument. First, it must be popular. A lot of researchers have used the instrument. Second one, it has been cited is also popular. Okay, it has been used more than once and also published in very good journals, so we can use that instrument. Published in a good journal and also popular. It has been used over and over again. So the instrument can be said that can be regarded as a reliable instrument. Can we develop new instrument? Let's say we are PhD students. Can we develop new instrument? Any idea? Any suggestion? Any?
Can Prof can, but we have to validate. We have to make sure the validation is true.
Right. There are different steps or different processes that we know that we need to go through when we want to develop instrument. It can be done, no problem. But there are different steps that should be looked into. We cannot just use the instrument, the newly developed instrument, and pilot test the instrument and just use it to collect the data for our study. There are other steps, other processes involved to validate the instrument. All right. Can we add items or variables in the instrument? in the existing instrument or established instrument? Of course we can. We can add items when we found that the instrument, the selected instrument, is not able to capture all the information that we want to collect, so we can add. There must be some good justification, and also adding some items or variables in our study in the instrument need to be justified by, of course, the experts in the area. All right. All right. Next, we move on to the ability to analyze the data. As I mentioned earlier, of course, analyzing the data is important, but deciding which one is to be used is actually, it is up to the student. But the student must be able to justify the choice of using a specific instrument. Some students prefer to use the most recent statistical technique, statistical tools, using smart PLS, using MOS, and so on. Some students just use SPSS. We cannot say that the analysis technique used by the student is not good, because he uses SPSS. As long as the students are able to find to reach the conclusion, it is good enough for the student, because SPSS can also is still valid, can also be used to analyze the data. Of course, we ask the student when they choose the instrument, not instrument, choose the statistical technique or the statistical tools to analyze the data. Okay, is the tool able to answer the research question? Whether the student is able to make decision by using the instrument, by using the statistical tool. Students should be able to show the goodness of data when they want to use specific tools to analyze the data. Before doing the analysis, students should be able to show that the data is good, the data are good, before they proceed to the analysis. Choose the right analysis for the right data. Data can be categorized to different types of categories, different data. So the analysis must be right, right for the right data. And also the last part is making the right interpretation from the analysis. And when they found the results of the study, the student should be able to make the right interpretation of the study from the analysis. Right? Some students, they just present the findings without any interpretation, correct interpretation, without any further explanation on the findings. So it is not good. It's good for the students. The student will what say. Okay, next one is the ability to apply. After they have analyzed the data, they have found the results of the study. Students should be able to apply the findings to solve the problem that they have mentioned in the first chapter of the study. All right, two things that we need to look into. The first one is managerial implication, and the second one is research implications. This is normal for every students or for every lecturer, researchers, and when we conduct a study, we have to at the last section of our paper, we need to emphasize on managerial implications, whether we have found the right solutions for the problem that we have mentioned earlier in chapter 1. All right, research implication is where it is about showing that we have found something. We have found new things in from our study. This should be highlighted because it is going to be referred to by other researchers, by students, other students, by other authors. That's why that's why the last part is also important to ensure that there is a continuity of research. Otherwise, we have to stop. After we have done the analysis, after we have found the solution, then there's no more uh, additional steps to move on. Uh, Research application will pave the way for future research. That's important in showing in presenting to other researchers that we have found something that need to be validated and need to be further investigated by future researchers. All right. And the last part is about the ability of the students to show that they have achieved certain philosophical level. Normally, we ask the student questions that require higher level thinking, such as kalau yang biasa ni, we just ask how, what do you think of the. Normally, we will ask the question of why and how does it happen, or the question pertaining to higher level thinking. They have to think a lot before they can provide the right answer using the question of how and why. Okay, example, cognitive level synthesis evaluation. This level should be achieved by the students before they can be considered graduated from the PhD study. For example, how can we say that IR 4.0 has dramatically changed our lives? This is a general question that you can ask the candidates whether they have achieved certain levels, psychological level, philosophical level, and whether they can think out of the normal thinking. They should be able to think out of the box, out of the box. To what extent does COVID-19 affect our education system? For example, if the topic is related to COVID-19, why do you say that millennials are less loyal? If let's say our students are doing something on marketing, millennials shopping behavior, for example, so we can ask the question with regard to millennials, the loyalty of millennials. All right. Okay. Some other things that we also consider when we evaluate the thesis. The next slide, please. Pertaining to the flow of ideas. We don't want the thesis to be jumping here and there without any clear direction. That's why we have to establish the flow. For example, in chapter 2, normally we'll start with introduction, then we describe the phenomenon of interest, the DV. After that, we use the theory or underlying theory or model to support our phenomenon of interest. After that, by using the theory, we should be able to identify the independent variables. Independent variables cannot come from nowhere. There must be some foundation. There must be some justification, and the justification comes from the theory. The justification comes from the model. That is the flow. All right. Of course, grammatical issues. A lot of grammatical issues need to be given serious attention. The format of the thesis, the currency of reference, for example, the reference must be current, must be within 5 years of publication, and also the presentation. The students should be able to present their ideas clearly in front of the examiners. All right. I think that's all from me. Any question from the floor?
Thank you very much. This is your professor, Dr. Abdul Kadir.
You're welcome.
So if anyone, if you have questions pertaining to the information that been delivered by Dr. Kadir, so please ask question. So if let's say you don't want to give verbal question, you can write down at the chat box. Therefore, we can pick up the question and Dr. Kadir can answer the question.
Semua dah tera-tera. Okey dah. Hebat kan.
Assalamualaikum, Doctor.
Ya, aku salah.
Okay, can I know what is the most common issues that you have found in current PhD thesis that students always make?
Most issues, the most
Common
critical
issues.
issues.
Yeah.
Most common issues. Okay. So far, from my reading, from my evaluation, the most critical issue is the way the student tie up the model or the theory with the IVs. Sometimes when we read the thesis, it's as if the IVs come into the investigation without any support. Then when we use the theory, when we use the model as an underlying theory, we should be able to guide the theory should be able to guide us in identifying the independent variables or other variables, other variables important in our study. For example, when we want to choose the moderator or mediator, the theory plays an important thing to guide us. We cannot just simply pick up from nowhere the independent variables, the moderator, the mediator, without having the theory to guide us. That is the common issue, the common problem faced by most students.
Okay, thank you, Doctor.
You're welcome.
Dr. Kadir?
Yeah.
Okay, I have a question. The question is, so just now you said that the thesis, it has to achieve a certain level, yeah?
Okay.
For it to be awarded, for it to be awarded as the PhD or master's thesis, master's level thesis, yeah?
Okay.
So what are the criteria for the award?
Criteria.
Yeah. How you measure that this thesis is up to the PhD level and this thesis is up to the master's level?
Okay, when we read the thesis, normally we will evaluate not the choice of the student with regard to the independent variables, dependent variables, or the theory, the instrument, but the justification. The justification must be good enough to support the decision. Normally, we'll judge the philosophical level of the students by looking at the justification provided by the students. The justification given by the student. We can say anything they want to say, but when we provide some kind of justification, and the justification must also be supported, correct? Must be supported with strong evidence from previous studies, for example. That is good justification. We don't want students just to provide reasons, rationale, without having backed up by a strong justification or evidence. This is how the students can portray the level of just professionalism or I can say that philosophical level in the thesis. Okay, Natazila?
Okay, another question, Dr. Kadir. As you mentioned, you mentioned it for several times. It is about being critical, isn't it? You have to be critical. You have to be analytical while writing up your PhD or while writing up your master's thesis.
Right.
So, how you define that one, Dr. Kadir?
Critical, being critical.
Being critical and being analytical.
Being analytical.
Yeah.
the higher level of thinking.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. That is very subjective actually. When we read, we can see that whether the students is critical enough or not. Whether they are, what is it?
Yeah.
Whether they can justify, whether they can use judgment. The judgment. The ability to use judgment and support the judgment and stand up by the judgment is very important. That is being critical. Being critical is where we look from different angles. We want to, let's say we say something is worth studying. Okay. So in order to be critical, we have to look from different angles. For example, we want to see whether the problem has been solved or not. That's one way. Another thing is we want to look at the aspects of uh, whether studies have been done to address the problem. That is second way. Another one is we want to evaluate the studies that have been done, whether the studies are good enough to provide a good solution to solve the problem. That is also another level of criticalness in the study. There's other things that we have to consider when we want to judge the criticalness of the students when they do the thesis, right?
Okay. So can we have question from the other participant?
Dr. Gita is also here. My
Dr. Gita,
student is also here.
Yeah.
A lot of my students.
Hi, Dr. Kadir.
Hi, how are you?
Good,
Dr.
good
Gita.
job, great learning, part of the learning curve.
Your session has been completed, over. Is it over yet? Not.
Dr. Gita, do you have any question to
Do
Dr.
you have any
Kadir?
question?
Do you have any question to Dr. Kadir?
You always have a lot of questions to
He's
ask me.
covered all of this. No question.
No question.
Assalamualaikum Dr. Kadir.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi.
Just one question.
Yeah.
How I do understand that clarity of writing is actually of importance when we write our thesis.
Correct.
I think that is one area that if you could explain a bit more from the perspective of an evaluator of the thesis.
Clarity of writing. Clarity of writing. Okay. Actually, when we write something, let's say we put ourselves in the perspective of students. So when we write something, we have to follow some convention, right? For example, let's say when we write something in literature review, something on previous studies, okay, we need to highlight our own perception or ideas pertaining to the relationship. After that, when we have provided clear information, or we have described clearly on the relationship, then we provide some justification of what we have put in our thesis. Then we support with our. There is some guideline. There are actually some steps that need to be followed to make sure that our write-up is clear and can be understood properly by the examiners. We have to learn normally from when we have done a lot of write-up. We write a lot, and then we will get the skill in writing. That's why I always mention to my student, we need to write. Always write anything from our write-up, from the experience. We know what is the first step, the next step, and the last step when we write something in our thesis. Of course, when we start writing, there are a lot of mistakes, there are a lot of errors. We don't know which one should come first, and second, and third. But through experience, we should be able to overcome the issues or the problems to write clearly pertaining to our thesis. Experience is very important. When we read, of course, kalau as examiners, our task, our responsibility is to read. It is not as critical as the student. The student have to think a lot on how to read, to write clearly the thesis. So when we read, when we can clearly understand without having to go back the first line, then we can say that the write-up is very clear. If let's say after we have reached a certain level, a certain paragraph, for example, then we have to go back further to understand the whole part of the thesis, then we can say that the write-up is not good because we have to go back after that we have to go back to understand further. All right. For example, the thesis that I'm evaluating now, it is good in terms of writing because I can just go through without having to go back even once, meaning the thesis is very good.
Thank you, Dr. Kadir. Just
Okay,
one more question. Just one more question, a very quick one.
Okay.
Does length matter? The length of the thesis, does it matter?
The length of the thesis, okay?
Does it matter?
Does it matter?
Yeah. What will be, because sometimes when student actually submitted their thesis to us,
Okay.
because they are able to write well, so the length is rather, I mean, it is still within whatever is suggested for a thesis. But some student, they write, I mean, they try to explain a lot more, so the length has become longer. So what will be kind of, okay, the in between kind of, or is it open for the student to decide? Thank you, Dr. Kadir.
Okay, regarding the length of the thesis, we need to refer to the guideline. For example, in our faculty, for PhD to thesis, students have to read, I think, not more than 60,000 words. To write not more than 60,000 words. So they have to follow the guideline. They have to follow the rule. Law, I think for law, there are a lot more. They can write a lot more. Well, for some faculties, there are some limitation in terms of the length of the thesis. So we need to follow the length. Actually, the best thing is the length does not really matter because the most important thing is the ideas. All the ideas have been clearly mentioned, clearly discussed in the thesis. As long as it is clearly articulated in the thesis, so I think it is good enough. Although we will have the minimum, we have reached the minimum number of words. It is not required for us to go extra miles to force ourselves to meet the maximum number of thesis, words for thesis. 60,000 for business. Am I right? 60,000. Dr. Anis?
We will check it.
Yeah.
But there would be some certain numbers of words that the students have to follow, that the students have to
Kalau PhD
fulfill.
60,000 kan, 60,000.
Yes, yes. Any other question?
Dr. Can I ask you a question?
Yeah, sure, no problem.
This is not a question, but this is a take. What is your take in it? sometimes we have cases where the line between a master's and a PhD presentation is very thin. So have you ever encountered it, and how do you, what do you think about it?
Of course, there is no objective guidelines pertaining to the evaluation of masters by research and also PhD thesis. Some have gone beyond the requirement to treat the master thesis as PhD thesis. That is going to be a problem to the students and also to the supervisors.
Yeah.
And that's why some supervisors urge the students to go far beyond the minimum requirement for master students, master by research students. So as examiners, we have to be careful when we evaluate and we provide justification, when we provide suggestion to the students. Don't go beyond the requirement of the degree, masters by research or PhD. If let's say it is PhD, then we can go further, asking something that should be fulfilled by the students to meet the philosophical level of the PhD. For master student, for master by research, we need to focus on the minimum level, not to go until the level is quite similar to PhD.
Mm.
Right.
Yeah.
There's no specific answer to your question, Gita.
No,
Because
actually,
I also facing the same problem when when we are dealing with evaluating master
yeah,
by research students. Yeah.
true. Actually, Dr. Kadir, sorry, it was not a trick question. It is just that sometimes the examiners evaluate master's level like macam lah PhD. So I find sometimes it's unfair to the students. So I just wanted to ask you, what's your opinion on that? Yeah.
Yeah.
True. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Lata.
Thank you, Dr. Kadir.
You're welcome.
Okay, just now, Dr. Aman have shared with us the numbers of words that we have to fulfill, yeah, for the PhD and master's thesis. So I hope that everyone, we can refer to that particular document in order for us to comply with the requirements of the MQA and IPSis.
Correct.
So is there any other question? Any last question?
Hello, Dr. Kadir. Assalamualaikum.
Assalamualaikum warahmatullah.
Long time didn't see you, right?
Okay.
I want to ask your opinion regarding some of the tendency of the supervisors who insist on the students to publish their papers before going to the Viva.
Okay.
But sometimes they were saying that by publishing papers, it's not easy. It's sometimes a very lengthy or a very tedious process, and sometimes it can affect their writing up of the thesis. What's your opinion on that?
Okay. Some faculties have required the students to publish, but there is no requirement whether they have to publish in Scopus in the journals or not. As long as the students have published the work, so they should be able to present or to go for Viva. Right. I agree that students should be trained to write and publish. So we have to follow, but we have to follow the rules, not to, let's say the students write the papers. So the name of the student should come first. Right. Some lecturers, some supervisors ask the students to write, but they put the name in as the first author. That is wrong. If let's say it is the students' work, so students own the work, so we have to acknowledge the students' work. Students should be trained, should be encouraged to write. they should be encouraged to write. That is my opinion. I always encourage my students to write so that they have the experience, they can sharpen the ability to write further. And also attending conferences. And those who have attended the conferences, when they attend the Viva session, and the session will be smooth. Believe in me, they will face no problem during the Viva session. When they have attended conferences, they have written journal articles and so on, they will face minor problems during the Viva session. Right?
Okay, Dr.
Thank
Kadir,
you.
one last request lah ya. I think
Sure.
we are at the end of the session. One last question.
Okay.
From the perspective of the examiners, yeah, when you evaluate the PhD thesis for the areas of social sciences, what would be your advice? What would be the advice lah?
Okay. When we evaluate thesis, non-science thesis, let's say in my area, marketing and also customer service, and now I'm evaluating emotional intelligence, the topic on emotional intelligence. Normally, I don't have something in mind. When we read the thesis, I just read with open mind. I just want to see how the students, whether he is able to present the ideas clearly or not. That is the most important. We cannot have some prejudgment, preconception in our mind that the students have to use this theory, or the students must use some analytical tools and when they want to do the research. No, we need to be open when we read the thesis. From our reading, from our evaluation, and only we try to improve the thesis by highlighting something, by providing the solution. Don't just mention that the thesis is not good. The problem statement is not good, because when we do something like that, the student is unable to improve the work because we don't provide suggestion for improvement. The best thing is provide something that can be used as guideline by the student to improve further. That's my last words. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. So I would conclude that as the examiners, we would like to help the student. Is it Dr. Kadir?
Correct.
Yes, but the student, at the student, they as a student, they should be also achieve certain level of standard for them to be awarded as a PhD students or as the master students.
Correct.
Okay, so I think we will end the session. For that, I would like to say thank you very much for Associate Professor Dr. Abdul Kadir Osman for the valuable sharing. I believe it was a very fruitful session from the perspective of examiners. And I would say thank you very much as well for the IPSis, particularly or especially for Dr. Aman and team for organizing this valuable webinar series. And I would like to remind you as well that we are going to have Dr. Gita also from the Faculty of Business and Management tomorrow, to discuss on evaluating master's thesis from the area of social sciences. So before we end our session, let us recite Surah Al-As. With that, thank you very much once again to Associate Professor Dr. Abdul Kadir Thank you very much as well for Dr. Aman and team for organizing this webinar series, and thank you also for everyone that have attended this fruitful and valuable session. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Assalamualaikum.
Salam. Thank you, Dr. Kadir.
Oh, thank you. Welcome. Yeah, thank you.
Dr. Kadir.
Thank you.